Hi, everyone. I'm Terry Moore. I'd like to welcome you to this occasion, and I'm very, very, very happy you can be here, and I'm happy myself for this day. The occasion is the launch of the Memoirs of Lynn Shostack, and it also happens to be her birthday, so it's a propitious occasion in many dimensions. Lynn Shostack is someone I knew well, and is someone who is immensely interesting. And I think if I can tell you a little about her, you'll find her interesting too, and maybe in some dimensions that no one really knew about. Lynn is mostly known as being a business innovator and genius who changed forever some facets of banking and marketing. In banking, for example, it was she who in the 70s invented what is now called private banking, and she did that for Citibank in the 70s. And at this point, I think most major banks all over the world have a private bank inside their bank. That and other innovations she brought to banking. She's also known for changing the landscape of marketing. And I should tell you a little bit more about how she did that because it's very characteristic of Lynn. Because she knew in the 70s how marketing was deficient in a certain way, and she wanted to change that. And in her own style, she decided that she wanted to make this major change with one essay. Not a book, not a series of articles, but one essay. And she worked all summer on this one essay, and it was published in the 70s. And I note that in the year 2000, at the change of the millennium, the American Marketing Association noted the most important essays that were written in each decade. And in the 70s, the one that was mentioned was Lynn Shostack. And her essay, Breaking Free from Product Marketing. That's a very Lynn Shostack title, by the way. Breaking Free from Product Marketing. What it did was establish service marketing, a term that she coined, as a separate discipline from product marketing because it required different concepts, different tools, and different channels of distribution. I think you can now actually get a degree in service marketing, and that's part of the legacy of Lynn Shostack. Lynn was, of all of the people I've ever met, certainly in the category of genius. I don't claim to belong to that club myself, but I have run in some fairly fast intellectual company. And Lynn is every bit a genius. And more than that, not just brilliant, but an out-of-the-box thinker. She had a capability of looking at things differently, and hence things like private banking and service marketing, and many, many, many other things that filled her life and the lives of those around her. I got to know Lynn in high school. We went to the same high school. She was a couple years older than me, so we didn't really know each other socially. But after high school, in college, she went to the University of Cincinnati, where she went to study art. She saw herself as an artist and wanted a career in art, and belonged to the College of Design, Art, and Architecture at the University of Cincinnati. I went to Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, which turned out to be a wonderful choice, because I found myself in a very interesting and unique college program that opened a lot of doors for me. Long story short, we got to know each other back then in the 60s. We fell in love and planned to be married, and I introduced her to this group I was in at Ohio University. And that led to her being interested in business, to her being encouraged to go to the Harvard Business School, and finally to find herself, instead of art, as a businesswoman. Now, in this connection, let me add that she once said that she thought there was really very little difference between corporate management and painting. It was just a matter of which media one uses and what tools one had. And she thought running a large corporation, and she ran corporations like Bankers Trust and Joyce International, she thought those tasks were very, very much like painting or some other kind of art. A very, very Lynn kind of comment. So she went to Harvard and then had a distinguished career that has left an amazing legacy. And although we were engaged back in the 60s, we broke up as we headed to graduate school. And we did not speak to each other for a little more than 30 years. But circumstances brought us together, and we took off as if from base camp. And Lynn and I were married in 2003. And we began a very happy and very interesting life together for the next 15 years. After which, Lynn became a victim of Alzheimer's disease. And that has really taken her away, and she's no longer as conversant and as present as the Lynn I once knew. But she has left an immense legacy of literature, of things that she wrote, things that she found interesting to think about, not just in business, but in philosophy and in spirituality and metaphysics. She wrote a lot during her life, and she had always wanted to write and set that as a skill that she wanted to develop. She wanted to learn to write. She wanted to learn to write poetry. Part of that was evidenced by the fact that one of the goals she set for herself back in early college was to be able to type at the speed of thought. And she took courses in typing and practiced a lot, and eventually she could type at about 130 words a minute, which she wanted to do so she could get down what she thought without having to edit it before she got it down. Once it was down, she could play with it, but she wanted to get it down, and that took, if you wanted to do this in readable form, typing. So she learned how to do that, and then got herself an IBM Selectric typewriter, which was a big deal at the time, so she could get her thoughts down. Now, what most people don't know about Lynn is that she not only had this very important business life, but she was very interested in philosophy and higher things. And many of her writings deal with perspectives of importance, what it is to mean something, what it is to be something, and how all these things work together and influence each other. Lynn wrote a lot, and she wrote very well. She often wrote in verse, and sometimes, in fact, more than sometimes, most of the time, her journal, which she kept since high school, was written in verse, something she learned to do, and with her typing skills, was able to do. Now, when I came into the picture again in the early 2000s, and Lynn and I got to know each other again, and not eventually, 1 year later, we're married, I brought to her my own perspective, and that involves learning a lot about comparative religion and philosophy and metaphysics and things like that. What that did for Lynn was give her some terminology and a vocabulary in which she could express some of these things. And she used it very well and was very happy to find terminology and traditional perspectives that she could use to express what it was she wanted to express. Now, today is the occasion of the launch of her memoirs. These memoirs were written by Lynn, and probably over the course of a decade, because she would look at and revise things time and time again. And finally, we have a volume, and here it is, Business and Being, and it is available right now, and this is the launch. You can get a copy from Amazon.com. I've ordered my copies, It's available as a pre-launch order, and the actual shipments will be on March 1st. Now, this is her memoirs, Business and Being, and it includes not only her history, but also some of her inklings about life and philosophy. Let's think of this as a first book, because in the future, we intend to publish a book of her essays about life, philosophy, and her view, which is generally different, interesting, and often inspiring about life and being and truth and meaning. And then we're going to publish a book of her poetry, since there is an extensive collection of her poetry, much of which is beautiful, and much of which deals again with the notion of truth and beauty and meaning. And I have one example. This, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's my favorite, but it's certainly on my list of favorites. This is half a page long. Let me read this to you. The truth spins itself out in infinite directions and forms. It paints the world by splaying itself like buckets of pure paint thrown against a wall, or better yet, against a passing train. The images disperse into infinitely complex patterns and collages. They unfold as the complexities continue into directions we do not know and to which we could never point. But they continue. The pure light of the sun is cast on a cloud. The light is true, but the shadow is the cloud. The shadow falls on clouds lower still, taking their shape. The first shadow now jumbled in their peaks and canyons. Shadow of a shadow, we see only the image on the surface where it falls. The shadow of a cloud on a cloud. But the light remains. Without it, there would be no shadows. Celebrate the light, not the shadows. And that's one example of the writings of Lynn. Now, that may be all I have to say, other than I will show you something of a classic picture of Lynn in her business days. And then a cover of Wired magazine, which she shares with me and my son Martin, and that was certainly a good time. So maybe I've had enough to say, other than let me say again, this is the book launch. The book is available from Amazon. You can order it today. Please do. I think you'll enjoy it. I think you'll find a very interesting person that nobody really knew very well.
Thank you, Terry. This has been wonderful. I mean, you've offered a great insight on who Lynn is and what the memoirs are about. And we have some questions here from our audience.
I hope I can answer them.
One of them is, what is your favorite memory of Lynn?
Oh, my goodness. I don't know that I can be quite that specific. There are so many wonderful memories of Lynn. I think perhaps my favorite message is, after we had decided to get back together, we met in London. And it was the knock at the door that was Lynn. And I opened it, and there she was. And I remember saying, "At last." And she said, "Yes, at last." Maybe that's my favorite memory. It'll do for now.
And Aisha Wright, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing the name right, but sends greetings, Terry. Would have never thought that someone so big in the business world would occupy her mind in the spiritual realm.
Yes, I think it was a great surprise to many. It was a surprise, maybe not that much of a surprise to me, but this was a side of her life, philosophy and interior knowledge and spirituality, that no one knew about. Yet she wrote volumes of intensely interesting, incisive literature, essays, and most often poetry about these things, because it was so important to her. And yet, as you say, Her reputation was that of a great businesswoman, and she was that. No one knew this other side of her. You can get a glimpse of it in this book. There will be more coming.
Great. And what was your inspiration to share this book now?
Well, she had written it after all, and these are her words. And I thought that these words need to be shared, and it offers such an interesting insight and perspective into somebody who has a lot to offer. It's also on the occasion of her birthday, which is today. And last year and coming this year is her 50th reunion at Harvard Business School. So that's just a coincidence, but it does work out well in timing.
Great. And Gareth Lowe asks, great, would you share with us your favorite quote of Lynn, and why did this favorite quote stand out?
Let's see. There are several quotes that I wish I had a little more time to think about that. The one that so often comes to mind is, cut my tongue out, I'll have it for breakfast, which is her sort of throwing up her hands on things.
And Rin says, one of my favorite memories of Lynn is when she taught my cousin and me how to use a Ouija board. I'm not sure.
Ouija board.
Ouija board. We were 14, and so at the time, it led to some unforgettable and spooky moments.
Yes, there was a Ouija side of Lynn, and in that connection, one of the earlier memories of Lynn, and this goes back to high school, where she had been accepted into the organization Mensa, which is for smart people, no surprise. And the Dayton, Ohio Mensa organization was working with one of the labs at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, doing some experiments in extrasensory perception. So she was part of that experimental group and had lots of good and interesting things to say about it. That may have been an inkling, that may have been part of her opening to these other things. But yes, she has, actually, we still have a Ouija board here somewhere.
All right. Anthony Lara says, the book seems really interesting. Is this the first one to be published?
Yes, this is her memoir. She has published several essays in business, and you can find them in Harvard Business Review and the American Marketing Association publications and elsewhere. It's worth saying that although her work in banking and marketing was done in the 70s, that she is still quoted by contemporary authors. Her work is still of note, particularly in the field of service marketing, which is, I say again, is a term she coined.
And James Wharton comments saying, celebrate the light, not the shadows.
Yes, maybe we could take that as a favorite quote from Lynn, from her poem. Yes, celebrate the light, not the shadows. I'm sure there are equally wonderful things, if only I could recall them. Thank you.
And we have another question asking, is this a traditional business book? What makes it different, if so?
Business and Being is not a traditional business book in that it is not really about business. It's about Lynn Shostak, and it's about how she developed, how she grew up, what her family was like, what insights she had over time, what her career was like. And let us remember, she was the first woman to hold a senior banking position. She was one of a very small number of women at the Harvard Business School, and she is often looked upon as an icon of possibilities for women in business.
I remember in fact, the term service blueprint was coined by her.
Yes, as part of her interest in service marketing. Service blueprint, and I think you can now get books on service blueprints, was also a term of hers.
Danny Karras writes, I don't know if this book speaks of her relationship with art, but I have found that most great businessmen and women have a deep bond with it. Surely Lynn was one of these people.
Yes, absolutely. Art was always part of her life. And again, she thought of herself as an artist and went to college to study art so she could be a professional artist. But what she learned, in her own words, is that business is an art. And it's just a different medium. So yes, not only was she an artist as a businesswoman, but she maintained her interest and continued to draw and sometimes paint for the rest of her life. She also had very strong opinions on decorations and colors, and has a very interesting scheme, which I'll just pass along because we have a moment, for how to paint a room, which is something that I've learned from Lynn. And it's essentially, this was the Lynn Shostak scheme for painting a room. Pick the color you want for the walls, probably something mostly neutral. Then go back to the same color palette and pick the same shade, but a lighter degree for the ceiling. And then go back to the same color palette and pick a slightly darker shade of the same color for the trim. What happens is people don't notice there's more than one color, but it feels open and expansive, and without really calling attention to itself. And that's, of course, how I paint things now.
Rin has an interesting question, and I'm itching to ask this. Can you share a little bit about the origin of river chicken?
How in the world did that come up? That was a dream she had about me, in which she had a dream about there was a chicken and a river in the dream, and I had come back into her life, and I think she saw life as a river, and I was the chicken in the scene, so it became kind of a pet name, River Chicken.
Wonderful.
I'm surprised to hear that question.
James Wharton asked, how honest do you think Lynn was being when writing this book?
I think Lynn was ruthlessly honest writing this book. That's the only thing she knew how to be. And I hope that those who are mentioned in the book understand that she has a honest and a no-compromise way of expressing what she thought was right and should be expressed. So we'll see.
And Bryce Johnson has a question. Danny has a question first. Has she written other books? How does this book relate to the others she has written?
The only other book she wrote is a book called University in Transition. She was hired by the president of Ohio University to write the chronicle of his administration. And this was in the 60s, where there was great change, and there was talk about a university, in fact, being a multiversity. And in the context of all of the social changes of the 60s, he wanted a chronicle of the changes that had occurred at his university, Ohio University. And he chose her because of her, I think, unusual point of view and her insight to write that book. And it's still available.
Right. And Bryce Johnson is asking, what new things can we learn from this book?
What new things? Well, I think to understand that it's always valuable having an out-of-the-box point of view. It may not always be useful, but there's always a contribution to be made by having a contribution that's out of the box. And in every team, there should be those who are different. And because that was important to Lynn. Other than that, the inspiration of somebody who would challenge herself to do things that she thought was interesting and fun and important, and then doing it, even if that meant being the first senior executive of her gender.
And Gratitude Radiance asks, why do you think Lynn chose to tell her story?
Well, I'm guessing that she thought it had resonance with others, and that others could learn from some of the lessons that she had during her life and her career. And I hope that's true. It's not just an interesting story and a story about somebody who was a lot more unusual than everybody thought, but there's some life lessons in there that I think are generalizable and usable.
Talia Taylor wishes Lynn a happy birthday.
Well, thank you, Thalia. Much appreciated. I will pass those on to Lynn when we cut the cake later today.
Alchemist Paul says, how do you feel about the way she depicted her relationship with others in this book?
Well, of course, honestly and accurately, but she did it from her point of view. She doesn't want to step out and make general comments from outside the situation. This is her writing about her feelings, her life, and her reactions to things. It's not a meta-narrative.
And I know we're running short on time, but the questions keep coming, so I'm going to continue.
Well, let's take another.
All right. So, what Ida Murad says, what were Lynn's favorite books to read?
Well, to start with, Stranger in a Strange Land, which is a book she turned me on to, and I'm very grateful. That has been one of the most interesting and informative books about language and culture and thought and meaning. And I know it's a classic science fiction work. She loved science fiction, but it was Stranger in a Strange Land that was first, and for which I will be ever grateful to have been pointed to. Oh, well, I think we're about out of time. Let me say again, this is a great day, and how pleased I am that you can be here and that I'm here and Lynn's here. And the book is available at Amazon. You can pre-order it right now, although it won't be shipped till March 1st. And I hope you do. And if you do, and if you read it, please let me hear from you. I'd be very, very interested in how it affects you. Thank you all for being here. It's a celebration. Thanks for helping us celebrate.